Today we're at the University of Minnesota Law Library talking with Marvin Anderson, who for many years was the state law librarian here in Minnesota. Marvin, as is sort of the custom in these interviews, could we begin by talking a little bit about your life, both when you were young and today?
It's good to see you again, Pat. And
oh, thank you.
It's been a while, and this is a wonderful opportunity. I really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this project. Law librarianship was a very important part of my life and my professional career. I received so much from the profession, so much from my colleagues in law librarianship and the people that I worked with. So it's a real honor to be included in this project. And welcome to Minnesota, which is my home.
Thank you.
I was born here, raised here. I left here in 1958 to go to college in the South, Morehouse College. It's a wonderful small school in Atlanta, Georgia. And without law librarianship, without Morehouse College, I don't think I ever would have become an attorney and eventually a law librarian, because Morehouse College is very, very, very important in my life. And after Morehouse, I went to Hastings College of the Law in San Francisco. Went to the Peace Corps. Returned, practiced law here in Minnesota for a number of years before I eventually went back to school, get my master's degree to become a law librarian. I think that started around 1975. The library school here at the University of Minnesota. So it's been a nice career.
Well, you were at the State Library for quite a while. You actually started in about 1980.
Right.
And then you retired in 2002.
Yes, I was there for 22 years, 22 fun pack years. It was a complete makeover of the State Law Library at the time I was there. It had been primarily concerned with the Minnesota Supreme Court. But when I was hired, one of the things that they asked me to do was to look into seeing what kind of services that we could provide to the outstate, what we call the Minnesota County Law Libraries. There were 58 of them here. And with the help of my staff, we created the County Law Library Project, where we provided help and guidance to the 58 county law libraries around the state of Minnesota. We were also asked to look into the prisons. The law library service to prisoners project got started during those 22 years. We got involved in producing CLE programs for attorneys. We had a program called Computer Assistant Legal Research, where we would use one of our staff members to provide computerized legal research assistance to outstate attorneys for a small fee. That was an innovation that we tried. And then we built a brand new Minnesota State Law Library, about 40,000 square foot library during the time I was there. Established a rare book room. So it was a good project, I think, and it was a good time to be at the Minnesota State Law Library. Those 22 years I was there.
Now, you started your undergraduate education at Morehouse.
I did.
And your law came along later. Was there any particular way you were attracted to become a law librarian, or did somebody play a role in that?
Well, that's a great story. I had traveled in Africa. During the time I was practicing law, I was on what they call the Minneapolis Civil Rights Department, and we created an advisory board that was made up of some leading members of the city of Minneapolis, business people, academic people. And one of the people that I encountered there was a man who was quite a well-to-do businessman. Very, very profitable, and he had an unusual business that I didn't know at the time, but it was an old business that was founded by his grandfather many years ago. And one day he contacted me and he asked me if I knew of anybody that he knew I had been in Peace Corps. And so he called me, and I went to his office, and he asked me if I knew anybody that could go to Africa on behalf of his company to look at several project ideas that were of interest to his company. I looked around and I found somebody that I thought would be the right person for him. I put them together, and they had a wonderful conversation, and I completely forgot about it. About 3 months later, I encountered him on the street, and I said, well, how's this project going? And how's the person that I recommended doing? And he looked at me and he says, I'd like to ask you. I says, what do you mean? He said, I haven't heard one thing from this guy since he went to Africa.
Oh.
I said, you're kidding. And he said, yeah, I'm not kidding. I haven't heard anything. I don't know where he is. The project is completely stalled, and I'm just at a loss to know what to do. So I just felt really bad about it, and I made one mistake when you do something like that. I asked him if there was anything that I could do. And he said, yes, there is. And I said, what is that? He says, you can go for me. And I said, what? And he says, I'd like for you to go for me. These projects are very important to my company. And I felt, well, you can't send me after all. He says, I want you to think about it and come back next week and let's sit down. So I went home and I wrote down all of the reasons that I couldn't go to Africa.
Your rejection speech.
My rejection speech.
Yes.
I must have worked on it. So I went to his office and I said, well, I can't go because last year I made so much money and this is what I would lose. And he said, I'll handle it. I said, there's no way I can go without knowing everything there is about your office, your company, what you do. And that's going to take a couple of months. I said, that can happen. I said, I'd have to visit all of your locations. He says, that can happen. Everything that I raised, Pat, he just eliminated them. And finally, he boxed me into the corner, and I said, I'll go.
All your good reasons for
All
not
my
doing
good
it,
reasons, and I
all vanished.
vanished. And so I made arrangements to return to Africa as a representative for this company. And I had what you call a 6-month contract. I had another month was spent just visiting his offices in Houston and in Florida and in London and in Rotterdam. I had business cards made. I was just ready to go. And the trip was very, very worthwhile. I would send reports in until I got to a country called Liberia. And in Liberia, we formed an association with some local business people. And this was where we were going to concentrate all of our efforts on the rehabbing of our rice mill. We worked out a contract. We brought the parties over here. This was my crowning glory. And then they reneged on the contract at the last minute after my company had done everything possible. This is a long story, but I'm getting there. The company asked me to prepare a legal memorandum as to our rights and responsibilities. I came and I didn't have any idea where to begin. Someone suggested that I go to the law school, Minnesota Law School. There was a man over there named Bruno Green, who was an expert in international law. And he was a former librarian of the Minnesota Law School. I made an appointment to see him, and he was just a marvelous person. He was from Vienna. He was the law librarian here. And he mentioned to me that he had come to America after the Second World War. He was an attorney in Vienna. But they couldn't practice law here at the time. So many of the refugees became law librarians.
I remember many of our colleagues.
Our colleagues.
Senior to me when I was first newly minted as a librarian.
Right.
Were from Europe.
They're from Europe.
Refugees.
Refugees.
They come here.
And they had just wonderful commercial backgrounds, and And he took me to the library, and within about a week, he had helped me prepare a memorandum that laid out our rights, able to get our money back from Switzerland. He just knew everything. I was completely fascinated by the time that I spent with him.
Mm-hmm.
So I asked him a question. I said, before I go back to practicing law, what would you suggest that I do so that I can have the ease and the facility that you had in doing this research? And he says, well, if I was you, I'd go to library school.
Mm-hmm.
I'd take the fundamental courses, organization of information.
Mm-hmm.
He says, you could probably go to library school right here. And he says, how much time you have left on your contract? I said, well, I got, some weeks left. He says, well, we're on a quarter system. I'll write a letter for you that gets you admitted.
Uh-huh.
I said, Professor Green, that's wonderful. This is an opportunity that I had no idea would be available to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I started library school. And the first quarter was over. And I says, well, it's time for me to get back to work. Right about a week before I made up my mind to start going back to looking to the old law firm, the dean came to me and he said, I understand you're in library school. I said, that's right. He says, I've always wanted my third-year students to write a paper.
Mm-hmm.
And part of their problem in the past is they really didn't have a good knowledge of how to research in a library.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to be a adjunct professor and help them write their papers?
Mm-hmm.
I says, well, you've been awfully good to me. I have no problem at all. And I said, I'll do it. So then second quarter is over. And meanwhile, I'm taking more library courses. At the end of the second quarter, Arlette Soderberg, I don't know if you remember Arlette or not.
No, I don't remember.
She was the longtime reference librarian at the University of Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
45 years.
Wow.
She said she always wanted to write a book, but she could never find the time to do so.
Mm-hmm.
And would I work in her position for the next quarter while she wrote her book? And I said, well, I might as well do it. And I did. By this time, I'm getting close to getting my degree in library school. I'm working at the University of Minnesota in the law library. I'm meeting wonderful people. I'm having a ball.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, I'm either going to keep on this path or I'm going to go back to practicing law. As soon as this quarter is over, I'm going to make my decision once and for all. Right before I made that decision, she breaks her leg,
Oh.
and she has to take another 2 months off to recover.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, the decision is made. I'm going to get my degree, and I'm going to become a law librarian based upon the idea that once a twig goes into the water, the old Japanese philosophy, you just let it go till it stops. And that was one of the reasons that I started to become a law librarian, because of that. And then after all of that was done, to back it up, I walked into the law library because of a guy named George Grossman, who was a professor there at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And the day that I walked in there, I told him that what I wanted to do and what I was trying to do, and he said, well, when can you start? I think those were the words out of his mouth. And from that moment on, I started and I became a law librarian the year of 1974 to 1975. It was a transitional year for me. And at the end of it, I had a new profession, I had a job, and I was introduced to a group of people that welcomed me unlike anything that I had ever experienced up to that time.
Mm-hmm.
And those were law librarians.
There are a lot of friends we made. You
Absolutely.
and I both,
Absolutely.
in our profession, and one of the huge advantages I'm having now and going around doing some of these conversations for the oral history is reconnecting with all these colleagues that I've known for years.
I would say that is probably one of the best projects that I've heard, what you're doing right now.
Thank you.
Because you've got an opportunity to see people who helped shape our profession,
Mm-hmm.
who were always willing to give up their time and I had been in the bar associations. I had joined the Minnesota State Bar Association. I had been in other organizations. But as far as camaraderie is concerned, and sharing and companionship, all of them seemed to fail when it came to the law librarian field. I think that the law librarians that I encountered, at least, were some of the most genuine, hardworking, sharing, and caring professionals that I ever encountered. And so they welcomed me into this profession, and I, at an age where it was critical to me, I was in my middle 30s when I came in. And they said, come on in, here's what we're doing, here's how I do it. Welcome to our profession. And George offered me an opportunity to go to a law library convention for the very first time in Toronto. I think it was 1975.
I remember that meeting, yes.
And that's my first chance to attend meetings, to meet people, just to get a chance to be around them. And I returned from there, and I told my wife at the time that I just felt really great. I think I made the right decision, because she had not been entirely in favor of it at the time. But she warmed to it.
Wives worry about that sort
Yeah,
of thing.
they
I mean,
sure
you've
do.
been a lawyer, a real lawyer.
Been a
in the normal
lawyer, I had
sense,
a job, and all of a sudden
you're doing something she isn't probably too sure she knows
so
anything
what are
about.
you talking about, And I said, I know, but it turned out just fine. It turned out just fine. The conventions were always really worthwhile, meeting people, and they encouraged me to get involved in a lot of the committees, what we call the special interest sections, the SISs. I got involved in trying to become the leadership aspect of it. And I had good encouragement from the Minnesota State Law Library eventually. They were happy to support our efforts, and I always returned from the convention with more ideas than they wanted to hear. So it was a very, very wonderful career for me.
Well, you certainly, in a few moments, maybe we can talk about some of the recognitions that
You're happy to.
have been given to you because of all what you've done over all the course of your career. But let me sort of go back a little bit. You came to the profession in your mid-30s, and sort of in bits and spurts until you finally
Made up
the
my mind,
decision.
right.
But prior to that, you not only practiced law for a while, but you joined the Peace Corps.
Well, yeah, I did.
And that, I'm intrigued. You were in Senegal, in Africa. Did you talk a little bit about that era in your life?
Well, that was fulfillment of a promise that I had made. Morehouse, the president of Morehouse College was Dr. Benjamin E. Mays. Morehouse is a small African-American college. There were about 450, maybe, it never exceeded 600 students when I was there. And most of the students lived on campus, except for those that lived in Atlanta. Dr. Mays was our president, and he was known as just an incredible educational person. When I got there, he was the mentor to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King was actually lived with Dr. Mays. He was only 15 when he attended Morehouse College, and Dr. Mays took him under his wing. Dr. Mays exposed him and a number of other students to these wonderful ideas about your dignity, how to confront racism, discrimination, to be proud of your heritage. And he had a commanding presence for all of us. Just a tall man, steel gray hair, over 6 feet tall, and a mesmerizing speaker. And every Tuesday, if he was in town, we would go to what we call chapel, and he would give us a lecture. And these lectures became famous for a number of people. Julian Bond, who was once a candidate for president, the youngest man. 6 men who eventually became members of the House of Representatives. At one time, there were 90 predominantly African-American colleges in the United States, and 44 of them were graduates of Morehouse College, the presidents. He's Lou Sullivan, who became the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, Dr. David Satcher. The list goes on and on and on of people who Dr. Mays influenced. And those that he had the most effect on were called Benny Boys. His name was Benjamin Mays, and I was a Benny Boy.
Benny Boy.
Yeah, I was deeply involved in leadership at Morehouse College, and I was proud to wear the handle of a Benny Boy. So one year, during my senior year, Dr. Mays came back on his Tuesday morning chapel, and he had a way of saying things that to him it was just a comment, but for the rest of us, our mouths were left wide open. I just got off the telephone with the President of the United States, Mr. Kennedy, who's asked me to join an advisory panel of a group of people called the Peace Corps. So I am on the advisory panel, and when I leave here today, I'm flying to Washington, D.C. to give them my ideas. So maybe 3 or 4 weeks later, or I don't exactly, before graduation, Dr. Mays addressed the senior class and he said, I am on the panel. I've given them my ideas. What I haven't given them yet are warm bodies to join the Peace Corps. So I'd like some of you, my graduating class was like 54 people. And he says, I'd like a couple of you to consider joining the Peace Corps, because I think it would be an embarrassment if nobody from Morehouse College joins the Peace Corps. That was in 1962.
That was really the
very beginning of it.
Yeah.
So as he was talking, he kind of looked over at one of his Benny Boys, which was me, and he said, I want you really to think about going to the Peace Corps. And when the meeting was over, I says, Dr. Mays, I've been accepted to law school, you know, and no, I'm the first person in my family ever to finish college. I'm the first person to ever even think about going to law school. And I promise you that when I finish law school, I'll join Peace Corps. I will do so. I'll do so gladly. But if you will let me go to law school, I would appreciate it. And he says, Mr. Anderson, I'm going to hold you to that promise. And you could never let him down. You just wouldn't let him down. So all through law, I took another year to get through law school. I was working, and I didn't really want to, but when it was time came, I wrote him, I said, Dr. Mays, who should I contact? I'm ready to go to the Peace Corps. And he said, well, where are you? He knew where I was. And they said, well, you're graduating? I said, yeah, I'm graduating now. So the next time I get a call back, it's from the director of the Senegalese project, the Senegal project. Said he was looking for somebody with a legal background to run a cooperative, a fishing cooperative, to set it up and to run it. And I said, well, that sounds kind of Indian. And he said, you don't have to be an expert, but if you have a legal background and you can understand how to set up an organization or a co-op, I think we want to use that model. Would you be interested? And I said, absolutely. I'm ready to come. So I fulfilled my promise to Dr. Mays by going to Senegal and becoming a Peace Corps volunteer, which I got to say was a wonderful experience.
That's what I've heard from others who've been there. We had a university librarian for a while when I was at American U.
Okay.
Pat Wan was the name, who'd been in the Peace Corps and had fond memories of that part of her life.
It came at a time when I felt I was doing something the Vietnam War was going on pretty strong at that time.
That's right.
I had some problems with the Vietnam War, but I still, felt that doing Peace Corps work was a nice alternative to that. I could still represent my country in another way than fighting, and that was one of the primary reasons why I went to Peace Corps.
Sort of getting back to your role as a law librarian, you said that you had the opportunity to meet a lot of people and they influenced you, and you were able to move into leadership roles in the association.
That ties back to Dr. Mays again.
Okay.
Dr. Mays had these certain philosophies that whatever you do, whatever you're involved with as a person, do the best job you can, and you do that job so well that when they come looking for somebody to replace you, they'll look for somebody just like you. Set the standard. Let them know that you're involved. And if you're going to be involved, whatever you do, put your whole heart into it. Don't hold back. If it's a job, do the job as best as you can. It may not be the job you wanted, but wherever you wind up, give it your best, give it your all. These were the sort of things that Dr. Mays would tell us on Tuesday morning. And I found myself in law librarianship. And I found that this is now my new profession. This is something that I've chosen. You know, a lot of things seem to fall in place to lead me to the position. So when I got a chance, I said, well, how do you become a good law librarian? Who are you people you model yourself after? And I looked around the profession and I saw the people who were doing things, what they were involved in. I made sure to seek them out and talk to them about it. And I listened to their advice. And they gave me good advice, and I used that advice to get involved in my profession. And to their credit, and I hope I reflected it the right way, I think I did a good job because I had good teachers.
Well, it's interesting. You not only must have done a very good job. In fact, I knew you over the years and knew about you, and you had a very, a reputation as a leader, a shaker of the right sort. I don't know who these people you just mentioned, but I suspect three of them were Roy Mirsky,
Yes,
Bethany Olkel,
Yes.
and Marion Gallagher.
absolutely.
And
They were very influential in
You
my
are one
career.
of a handful of colleagues who have been honored by the awards, the 3 awards, each of which is named for a different one of those individuals.
Absolutely, they were. Roy Mirsky called me and welcomed me to the profession. I think he knew George, and he had offered me a position at Texas at the time. Unfortunately, I couldn't accept that position at that time due to some personal issues here in Minnesota. But I thought that was a real honor and a treat. So I sought out Roy Mirsky when I got there. Marion Gallagher from Seattle took a liking to me because she lived in an apartment building in Seattle where my aunt lived.
Okay, yeah, the one up on, I think they call it First Hill. In those
First
days.
Hill.
Yeah, right near the downtown, right above it.
I have an aunt that from Seattle. My family is originally from Seattle. My father moved to Minnesota during the Second World War, but my 2 aunts remained in Seattle. And my aunt, who had a government position, got to know Marion Gallagher, and we would exchange greetings, and she just said, I told your aunt and I'm gonna look out for you. And she took a wonderful interest in me, so we communicated over on the telephone or whatever. We would exchange letters and we would meet. So yes, she was. I was deeply, deeply honored to receive the Marion Gallagher Award. Not only because she was a consummate law librarian, but she took a personal interest in me. Bethany Olkel was the same.
Yes.
Roy Mirsky. There were George Grossman was a great help to me because he had a fine sense of organizing and writing. He encouraged me to write articles, which I did. Just all of the people that you name in our profession that were in a leadership role. At one time or another, I spoke with them and I received encouragement from them. Not just the state law librarians, but the academic librarians as well.
Well, of course, Roy was at the University of Texas.
Exactly.
In that era. And Marion was at the University of Washington in Seattle.
Bob Baring was over at, had eventually come to California.
Yes.
And the state law library people were really influential. Judy Meadows, I think you've mentioned her name.
Judy is a friend. And
Judy's a friend. I'm trying to think of Carol's last name in Louisiana.
Billings.
Carol Billings.
Yes.
Carol Billings and we formed a strong friendship. All of the state law librarians that I knew, we would work together. Cynthia Fellows, who was up in Alaska for many years. They all were doing fine things for the association. And the association encouraged people who wanted to work. And it was a great association, Pat.
I too share that. I mean, it was very welcoming, and if you're willing to do the work
Exactly.
to help out and did it well or reasonably well,
Right.
there was more than enough that came your way again.
Exactly. And we had and not only on the national association, but my local chapter, Minnesota Association of Law Libraries, had that same sort of drive and skill. I got in a leadership role there, and just this past year, I was asked to come back to the spring conference, and it's a 2-day conference. That was something that I was fortunate enough to get started when I was with MAW, 25, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And they're still doing it, where we bring speakers in, and it's always been a stop for the national president to come through and talk to the Minnesota Association of Law Libraries, because there are a great number of colleagues here that I worked with. Barb Golden, Ann Grand, Shirley David, all of them made the Minnesota Association. Suzanne Thorpe was another good one that was a great colleague here. I'm trying to think of the law librarian here that went to New York.
Kathy Price?
Kathy Price.
Yeah, she's now living in retirement near D.C.
Is she really?
Yeah.
Kathy Price was through here
Yeah.
for a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
And so these were all of my influences were people that were doing. Dr. Mays always said, associate with people who are doing things and it will rub off on you.
And I want to reemphasize the fact that you have the Roy M. Mirsky, as it's now named, Spirit of Law Librarianship
I do.
Award. You have the Bethany J. Oldfield Award, which is the highest distinguished service award of the state, local and county law librarians special interest section. And then ALL's own Marianne Gould Gallagher Distinguished Service Award,
Very
which
honored.
is the association's highest award of its own right.
Yes.
And these, you're in a fairly select group.
Well, I
People
feel-
with all those. I don't know if anyone has done all a triple triple play.
Triple play, yeah. It was Dr. Mays would always say, just do your best work and things will come. You don't have to go after it.
Mhm.
And if it never came, if these awards never came to me, Pat, I still would have been just as interested in working, because I didn't do it for the awards or for that. I did it because I wanted this profession. This profession gave me a choice. I mean, gave me an opportunity to kind of change my professional career.
Mhm.
They welcomed me, solidified my finances, my health care, my family, and allowed me to grow for 22 good solid years. So I had a lot to give back to this group.
Well, it's really been a wonderful way to earn a living, in my opinion, as well. I had a career as you did. And,
Right.
Just fascinating.
I think your career is a little bit longer than mine, though, wasn't
Yeah, it may have been. I started a few years earlier. I didn't do the Peace Corps.
Yeah.
And I didn't practice law particularly
Yeah.
before I started, but I sort of grew up in the law library.
Oh, you
Literally
did?
as a kid. I started at 15.
Really?
Yeah, and eventually graduated first from law school and then the law librarianship program that they had at the University of Washington.
Right.
So
right.
it was sort of a natural, I evolved into it that way.
That program now is training law librarians, isn't
Still,
it?
still is, yeah.
is.
Penny Hazelton.
Penny Hazelton.
Is the person who runs it in the proper sense of that term. She teaches in it.
Did Al Coco try to do something like that in
He
Denver
did
at
one
one
at
time?
Denver as well.
Yeah.
His was a slightly different focus, but it was much the same kind of program.
And when Penny had her program, they would send them out for their internships.
Mhm.
We always had intern during my time at the State Law Library.
So somebody would come here.
Somebody
I
would come
remember I went east to Harvard actually,
Mhm.
the year I did it. Al's program, I mentioned, it was a little different in some ways. He had his students sort of placed in jobs throughout the year that they were in the program.
Oh, they were, okay.
So they got their practical education
Mhm.
more that way as opposed to the few weeks of practical experience
Yeah.
in an internship position like
Okay.
Marion had.
Okay.
So you were a mentor to some of those
Oh, yeah.
graduates.
That was my, one of the goals of the State Law Library when I was there is to, if somebody wants to come in and mentor, if we can mentor somebody and help them grow, let's open up, let's give people George Grossman gave me an opportunity without looking at any of my resume. I don't know, he's a gut reaction. So I hired as many people as I could at the State Law Library based upon that. And I had I had Shirley David, who became a law librarian at
Yes.
Sacramento.
Yeah.
I had Beth Peterson, who became the state law librarian of Utah. I had Sarah Galligan, who became the law librarian for here from Ramsey County.
Mhm.
I had a couple of other ones who've gone on to law librarianship because you give back to your profession if it's given a lot to you, and it has.
Yeah. We've been talking about what you've done in law librarianship as such, or our niche of the legal profession. But you actually were involved and contributed to the broader legal profession here in Minnesota.
I have.
And the Minnesota Coalition on Government Information as well, which is, I guess, an even broader.
It's a broader, yes. We have, Minnesota had this wonderful idea to divide the state of Minnesota into 7 divisions.
Mm-hmm.
And within these 7 divisions, all libraries are represented.
Mhm.
State, court, county, private, professional, you name it. And each of the 7 divisions has a director.
Mm-hmm.
Our division was called MetroNet.
All
It
right.
represented the metro area, which was about 14 counties, and it's the largest
The
division.
area around
Minneapolis and St. Paul,
Yeah.
in the surrounding suburbs. It's the largest one.
Mhm.
Minnesota has 4 million people. The MetroNet libraries represent maybe almost 3 million people.
Yeah.
And the rest, other divisions are outstate. They had a very, very active program.
Mhm.
And each of the programs, one of the most important programs of the MetroNet division was the dissemination of information. And the dissemination of legal information was very important to them
Mm.
because they felt that if a person had access to legal information, they could make decisions, informed decisions about their life and informed decisions about who should represent them. So we stepped in at the very beginning of the MetroNet organization and said, if you need legal information, the Minnesota State Law Library is here to help you. We will come to your library. If you have a library, we'll hold courses on public legal information, how to find it, how to read statutes, how to read a court case.
Mhm.
Our library is open to you. We would send, some of our staff members would go to public libraries and conduct courses for public library reference people
Mhm.
as to how to find legal information. We created a Minnesota Legal Periodical Index, that our state law library started that, so people could have access to legal periodicals that contained information. And we just worked with MetroNet, and they were very appreciative of our efforts. And at one point, they decided that they had an award to give out, and they really gave it to me, but they should have given it to the Minnesota State Law Library, because I was the director, but that was something that my staff enjoyed doing.
Yeah.
And they still do. We still provide that kind of service to, when people walk in, they're our clients, not just the judges, not just the attorneys, but the public. And all of our resources are geared to allow the public to use our resources, to make them easy to use, whether we have to do bibliographies, tutorials, you name it. If that person needs our help, let's give it to them. And that was the philosophy of the Minnesota State Law Library, which, Pat, the court really encouraged me to do.
Yeah, that's good, because you don't want I suppose the court would be the primary users, at least initially.
Exactly.
They could be reluctant to share the resource.
Exactly.
Yeah, fortunately, they weren't.
We've had judges in outstate, when we were trying to do this in outstate Minnesota, they said, well, it's like giving a gun to a toddler. You give them a little bit of legal information, and they think they'll come in here and they'll ask this and that. And so that wasn't our intention, Your Honor. Our intention was just to give them the background that they can ask intelligent questions.
Yeah.
Well, they're asking too many questions now.
Oh.
And that was always something. It's the same what we did with the
Maybe
prisoner.
because you gave them this information, you weren't asking too many questions.
Yeah, it was always that tension between information that we provided and the and the judicial branch that wanted to keep things they were slow, a little bit slower than the law librarians were. That was our passion.
You all brought them along.
Yeah, you bring them along the best way you can.
It was a success.
Oh, yeah.
Long term.
In the long term, they understood what we were trying to do, because the Minnesota Supreme Court was one of the first ones to start putting forms online, and for people to fill out their own forms. And we were helpful in that regard.
Yeah.
So a person can download court forms and fill them out. Then they would come into the law library to look up cases and things. And we have several articles in the Bench and Bar magazine that would walk people through the steps of how to do your own case, but not just for a court, but just for information. Where do you go to get information about statutes, about ordinances, about rules and regulations? Because it's your right and it's your information. We're here to serve you. That's our philosophy. It always has been. That's the way it should be, I should say.
Yeah, I share that view as well. I think everybody, pretty much in our profession, does. I mean, we're that kind of a profession.
We are.
Yeah.
Our profession serves the public, serves its clientele. And I like that. I got a good kick out of having somebody write a note or just say, you really helped me. Thank you so much for what you did. And I'd call the staff meeting and say, I want to read something that I got today. And it's something that you guys did last week. And this person just wrote back and said, I just want to share that with you. And I had a lot of opportunities to do that, I'd say, over the years, which really pleased me. To let people know that somebody appreciated the service that they gave. And we've had a couple of people that wouldn't be served by everybody, but they hung out at the state law library, and everybody had one or two clients that only would talk to them, and that was one of the things we always laughed about.
Yeah.
Pat, this is yours, and you would go out and see that person.
There was sort of safety in knowing the relationship probably developed in between them.
Right, absolutely, yeah. So all in all, it's been a wonderful opportunity to work and to meet people. It's a fulfilling profession. I feel fulfilled. I feel that I was able to use my whatever strengths and skills and talents that I had, law background, working at the university, working at the state law library, I had a fulfilling career. And I'm pleased that I can say that.
That's good. It's good to hear, it's good to know, it's certainly even better to have experience.
Yes.
I'm sure.
Right.
Marvin, as we sort of come to the close of our conversation today, is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to mention?
No, you did a great job. I appreciate the opportunity to just remember the profession, and I think we pretty much covered everything that was important to me.
Covered a lot.
How I got in it, what it meant to me, the people who were important to me, and the lasting legacy that we were able to do at the State Law Library. There were some projects that we did over there that I feel were just really outstanding.
Mm-hmm.
And the people, one of the projects very quickly, when a Supreme Court justice would die,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not die, when they would retire, we would prepare a volume, and we would call it the Judicial Career of Pat Kehoe, or the Judicial Career.
Yeah.
And in this, we would compile information about that judge.
Mm-hmm.
And I would do an oral interview, but we would compile the letters of congratulations when he or she was appointed.
Mm-hmm.
And we did a bibliography of their opinions. And we would ask the judge, the justice, to select 10 or 15 opinions that he or she thought best represented his or her judicial philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
And then we would ask the law clerk, one of their law clerks, to write an essay about the judicial impact of Pat Kehoe's decisions on the Minnesota law.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of these decisions were digested, organized according to subject matter. And we would then do an interview, and then we would create an extraordinary session of the Minnesota Supreme Court to deliver the book to the retired justice.
Mm-hmm.
Last year, after he died at 95 years old, one of the very first people we did a book for, in 1982, 2 years after I got to the court, the family called me and asked me to come to the funeral. And I said, well, this is very much of an honor. I said, we used your book to gather the facts of Dad's life.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
And that's just all these years later.
And 30 years later.
30 years later,
Yeah.
what our staff compiled, because he had a biography I asked him questions about his life. We'd have his resume, places that he worked, and we compiled all of his speeches and all of his writings,
Mm-hmm.
and we presented. They called and said that, towards the end there, everybody's moving around, and we sat down and we said, what are we going to put? They used the book that the Minnesota State Law Library compiled to help them organize material on their dad's life.
Now, did you retain copies of
Yeah, we-
those?
yeah, we
So you have a tremendous archive.
We have a great. We would have a copy made for the justice,
Uh-huh.
which we leather bound.
Yeah.
One for each of his children. One would go to the law school library where he graduated or she graduated from.
Mm-hmm.
One would go to his hometown library, wherever he was born or she was born.
Mm-hmm.
And one would go to his college library. So in this case, there were like 9 copies.
Mm.
And we would raise the funds from his or her law firm or his or her personal funds
Mhm.
to make the additional copies. Our copy was always free, and then, of course, we got 17 of these that have been compiled over the years.
Mhm.
But they're not doing it anymore.
Oh, it's a shame.
Yeah, I
In
find
this era, you can find a lot through online
Yeah.
research, but it's still not anything as extensive as these must be.
Well, these were great because it was like a survival thing. You never could be fired because they wanted their book. They always used to tease me. Said, "I guess we can't fire you until after."
Better than tenure, huh?
Exactly. It was a great project, and it's one project that I wasn't mentioned, but I'm really, really, really proud of that because last year it happened, and it just, and I completely didn't know why I was calling. I was very pleased, and I attended the funeral, and they said, each one of the kids came and said, thank you for doing that book. Now we have something that our kids
Yeah.
can know about their grandfather.
Those will be wonderful.
Wonderful books for them.
Archives in the family,
They're-
mementos of somebody long gone perhaps eventually, but still remembered.
The Minnesota State Law Library, we call it the Minnesota Justice Series. And we have them for, while I was there, for every Minnesota justice that retired. It fills a real big gap in local judicial history.
Oh, I imagine there's a lot of treasure trove of information in some of those, or all of them.
All of them, all of them, all of them were there. And all of them had something special that they conveyed. But like you say, now you can find a lot of information online, but for the family and for the library, it was a project that I think meant a lot to them, and it meant a lot to us to be able to convene an extraordinary session. Everybody was fully robed, and the law library was in charge of this procedure, and then after the book was presented, we would have a reception. So it was a reunion of family members would come from wherever they were located to be a part of this. We had governors speak, members of the House of Representatives, we had a state senator come, and we always had character witnesses, we called them, to say why we should expend money to acquire this book. And that was the theory of the court case. Since they were I would ask for permission to expend law library funds to acquire the judicial career of so-and-so. And they say, well, call your first witness, and I'd call somebody and they would speak. It was a great project, wonderful.
Well, Marvin, I think on that, let me thank you not only on my own behalf, but on behalf of Michelle Wu, Frank Hodak, and of course Dick Spinelli,
Right.
who are our colleagues with whom I've had the honor of working on developing this oral history of law librarianship, which is part of going to be part of Hein Online's Spinelli's Law Library Reference Shelf.
Well, I thank you for taking the time to do this, Pat, and please convey to my colleagues that give them my very, very best. I think that they're going to enjoy this project as much as I have. If they they'll have a great afternoon to remember and reminisce about our profession that means so much to both of us.
Yeah.
Thank you for this opportunity.
These have been a wonderful experience, and learning so much about so many of you has been an immense pleasure for me.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.